Welcome to the EI Guru podcast, a podcast completely focused on emotional intelligence. Typically, the first question I get is, what is emotional intelligence? In very simple terms, it's how we manage our emotions in our interactions with ourselves and others. Or put another way, it's being in the right state and not being in a state when under pressure. Emotional intelligence is another label for mindset, and we all know that when navigating those important conversations, we need to tap into our best. I'll be interviewing leaders and experts in this ever-expanding field and sharing the data on why emotional intelligence is the difference that makes the difference in all of our relationships. Remember to share and subscribe to the EI Guru podcast, and if you have any questions, you can post them once you've subscribed. Okay, so good morning and welcome to the latest episode of the EI Guru podcast. Today, I'm joined from one of my mates that I've known for some years, actually, who was my co-crew chief, back in the race across America, my first solo race across America, Paris Golden. And Paris is joining us from Australia, so all the way down under. Struth, mate.
G'day.
Yeah, g'day. And so Paris, I've invited Paris on specifically as a leader. He's the managing director of McCormick Foods in Australia. So down in Australia, as I said, you can see by the suntan that that's where he's living compared to the English white pasty look that we tend to have. So Paris, give our listeners a sort of a sense of your career. So I know that you started off with an engineering degree and then followed that for a little bit. I'm not sure, I can't remember exactly the precise details of it all, but then you snuck out of that and then changed tack. So yeah, if you can share with our listeners some of that, your stepping stones into leadership and your career.
Thanks, Jim, and thanks for inviting me on the EI Guru podcast. It's an absolute pleasure. And yes, it is nice and sunny and warm here. February is probably the best month in Melbourne, so we are enjoying the summer. So it's a good time of year to catch up.
That might be painful for our listeners to listen to, by the way. But yeah,
well, they can listen to it any time of year, I guess. So.
Yes.
But so you sort of referred to my past life as an engineer. So I might even go back further than that because I guess I grew up in the UK and I was educated in the UK, and I'm not sure the education system was perhaps as enlightened as it is now. But when I was growing up, you were advised to pursue studies that are going to help you get a job, and a good job looks like accounting or something like that. So I was reasonably good at maths and science and things like that. So I guess almost from the age of 14, you sort of streamed into lanes. So you become a science or a maths person. And then once you've done that and you've done your O levels or your GCSEs, then you have to pick your A levels, and so that led to maths and science A levels. And then once you've done those A levels, it's like, well, what am I going to do with that? And you need something vocational. So the choice was maths, science, or engineering. And I picked engineering. And I really wasn't that conscious as to why, only that those steps in my education led me there. Had I known what the workload was at university, engineering generally being the highest workload degree you can pick, I probably wouldn't have. But anyhow, I did that, and I actually became a sponsored student with BP, as it was then, in their chemicals division, to become a chemical engineer. And I worked for them during the holidays and as a sponsored student. And I graduated in 1994, which was a recession. And that year, BP cut their graduate program. And they said, look, we're not taking any graduates this year. Take a year off, come back in a year's time. So I thought, oh, well, that's okay. And I'll just hang around for a year and kick around, and I was quite sporty at the time, so it meant I could do some sport. I was laboring on building sites, earning a bit of cash. But meanwhile, all my friends were getting jobs and starting their careers and living in London, that sort of thing. And after about 3 months, I thought, no, I can't do this for a year. I need a proper job. So I looked at the career service at university, and I saw an advert for PepsiCo. And I thought, oh, that sounds wonderful, exciting. It must be marketing or something like that. So I applied and I went to the interview, and I realized it was driving a car around London selling Walker's crisps. Um, and what really impressed me, bear in mind I'd spent a lot of time with engineers who, I don't want to generalize too much, but of a certain way of being. And then there was
Yep.
all these sales people, and they were just really energetic and exciting. And I thought, hey, I get given a car, I've got as many crisps as I can eat, I get to drive around London all day, visiting corner shops and petrol stations and that sort of thing, and being a sales rep. I thought, I'll give that a go, give it a year. And there we are. That was 30 years ago now.
Yeah, wow. Wow,
So,
that's a hell of a step into, and you're right. You're sort of not really generalizing because engineering folk are more left brain, more linear, more logical, and you do come across them with great energy and great passion for their job and their roles. But actually, you're right also in saying that actually the extroverts tend to be more the salesy sort of marketeer type people. So yeah, that was a bit of a shift, and it's funny how you sort of almost fell into it as opposed to
yeah,
you chose it. It's sort of, I always think about falling into coaching. I didn't really choose it. I fell into it, and similar. You fell into your career as a PepsiCo rep way back
that's
when.
right. What's
Wow.
interesting is as I've progressed through my career, I do come across a lot of engineers in the food industry and in senior jobs. So MD, CEOs, heads of. Uh, so there's something about the engineering brain, I guess, that that lends itself to this industry. So I am always surprised at the number of, oh, I did engineering too. And so yeah, it's not, maybe it's not as an unusual career path as you might think.
Yeah. Yeah, it is but it is interesting. So PepsiCo, and then how long, what were the sort of stepping stones from there into leadership? So you went from sales, you did some marketing for memory.
Yeah, so I went up through the sales channel, and back then there were pretty standard sort of career paths of increasing responsibility through to national account management and regional management. Um, and what was wonderful actually about that time was PepsiCo was like a real academy. So the people I was surrounded by, the people I worked with, were just fantastic, and there was some magic going on in the leadership of that business about who they were recruiting and why, and then what they did with us. And there are leaders of businesses and people who've done great things who from that cohort, and so that was wonderful. Of course, you don't appreciate it at the time. You're just sort of getting on with it, but it probably meant it was a little bit competitive. So there was a bit of, who can move the furthest, the fastest going
Yeah.
on. And, when you're in your 20s, that sort of thing did exist. I don't know whether it still does, but um, there's some key moments in my career path then. I got the opportunity to come to Australia in 1999. There was an acquisition. It brought some people in, and I was fortunate enough to be one of those. So I got my first international experience then. It's the first time I'd actually been to Australia. Spent 3 years here, then went back to the UK and did some project work at PepsiCo before moving to GSK.
Right.
So GlaxoSmithKline in the consumer division. And that was probably the step up um, into real people leadership, second line leadership, third line
Yeah.
leadership. Um, and So it was at that point that, you start to get more significant teams, more significant responsibility, and also the opportunity to really influence and shift culture
Yeah.
quite a lot as well. So that was a fantastic experience as well. And then a few other moves in between before I ended up, Katie, my wife, and I decided we wanted to come back to Australia. So in 2007, we came back, and I had a role at Coca-Cola then, and again, another international role across Asia Pacific, lots of traveling, experiencing lots of different countries and cultures, which was wonderful. We lived in China for a little while as well. And then I joined McCormick in 2015, and that was the opportunity to lead an organization. And that was something I was really looking for, where you can influence strategy, culture, capability, and, really start to shape an organization. And that's what I was looking for at the time.
Yeah, I mean, it's a spectacular career, and it sounds like you've got more balance now as well. I mean, I know you relatively well, of course, so there's more balance in your life work balance.
Well, yes, and for listeners, Jim did help me out at a period in my career which personally I wasn't doing so well, and I appreciated the love and support and help that Jim gave me in reframing what was going on in my life. And it wasn't all about career and how you manage all of that. And actually, interesting looking back on all of that, that has helped me become a much more effective leader, that experience.
Mm,
Um, but yeah, in terms of balance, I wonder whether it's a function of age or experience that you get to a point where, and becoming a parent, that has a huge influence of, okay, where are my priorities and what is important? And
yeah, it,
certainly for me, I found that the older I've got, the more perspective I have.
yeah, okay. I'm not sure everyone gets that though, Paris. Not everyone gets the. I think what happens to most senior leaders that I've come across in my career as a coach is that they are running so fast to stay on the treadmill that they're not conscious of the impact that that's having on the family dynamic, their health and well-being, uh, and the underlying stress that is there. Normally, typically, very obviously, but not to them. So, underlying stress is the thing that gets you and creates illness and disease,
Mm.
and that's unknown. We don't know that it's going on because it's underlying. It's sort of like it flies under the radar, but it's there for sure. And I think
Well,
you've,
and certainly that time I referred to,
yeah,
it was back in 2004, 5. That was certainly the case for me. I didn't really realize,
mm,
why am I feeling like this? Why is this happening? Why do I feel out of balance or out of control? And, you helped me sort of understand that by asking me some questions, asking me to pause and reflect. And for sure, I remember being in the grip and gripping what I had so hard because that was attempting to exert some kind of control.
yeah, yeah.
And
It,
then, yeah, when you realize you don't really have a lot of control, you can only control your reactions, then it's like, okay, wait a minute, then I need to start
yeah,
observing, reflecting, managing this.
yeah. That's interesting because you I think bit very heavily on that thought and processing it in that way. And I think that comes from your sort of engineering mind. You're sort of like, yeah, this logically makes sense, so I've got to do it. Whereas a lot of people will battle against it, so they will push back and sort of not really fully appreciate. I think we get so heavily conditioned into thinking that we settle down, have a family, and then pave a career path for ourselves, and also continue to go up the ladder. And as that happens, more pressure, more time is committed to work, not so much the family, not so much self-care, etc. So of course that's when the pounds start getting put back on, and all those things. So you know the deal. You've lived some of that. So yeah, I'm interested in what would be in your leadership recipe cookbook? So what are the things that you would have in your recipe for success for leadership? So help our listeners understand some of those thoughts and ingredients that you think are really critical for exceptional leadership.
Well, certainly what I value, and I guess what I try and exhibit, I think first of all, you have to be yourself. So you have to be authentic. And the reason I think you have to be that like that is if you attempt to put on some kind of act or some kind of narrative, people see through that straight away.
Yep.
So far better to actually be authentic, vulnerable, be yourself, admit your mistakes so that people can relate to that. And then you need to be accessible, which means, yeah, I spend half of my working time just talking to people. That's the most important part of my job is just talk to people. And it doesn't
Yeah.
matter who they are, but yeah, being able to just listen, understand what's going on, yeah, ask people. So, yeah, what's going well, but yeah, what's difficult? What could I help you with? Is really, really important. And those are the two things that I sort of just try and keep front of mind. And with my leadership team, we have like most leadership teams, we have our routines and we have a monthly routine, which is a business review where we get lots of information coming in from the team. And question I always like to ask at the end of that is, okay, did we hear what's really going on? Are we accessible? Are we being told everything? Or is it being sanitized or filtered? Does it
Right.
feel,
Okay.
what we're feeling,
Mm,
is that correlating with what we're hearing?
yeah.
And if it isn't, something must be up. So let's investigate it.
That's a lovely way to approach it, and not I can't imagine too many leaders thinking about. So, what are we feeling about this? The stuff that we're getting back from our teams. Are they being truthful?
Mm.
And you've got to be able to invite that trust in your team. By you being vulnerable. So if you're being authentic and being vulnerable as a leader, that invites others to be vulnerable as well and share their truth. So
Mm.
if you will have experienced in your career leaders that dampen trust down or actually don't have trust at all, and that's because they don't trust their team to chip in. They don't invite them to chip in with their truth. If you did tell the truth, you'd probably be on your way. So
Mm.
and you've definitely, I know, experienced some of that in your career as a leader, for sure.
Yeah, look, every organization has its culture. And yeah, I can't speak highly enough of McCormick. And it's one of those examples where your personal values overlap
Yeah.
very strongly with the organizational values.
Mm,
But the thing about culture, really, it boils down to what you say and what you do.
yeah.
So how you communicate, what you communicate, and then how you act is really what defines the culture. Probably the thing that I've learned the most in this position is just how important what I say and do is.
Oh yes.
So, because everybody's watching you
Yeah, they are.
all the
All
time.
yeah, all eyes are on you all the time as a leader, and a lot of
Yeah.
leaders don't really fully appreciate that, but they are. They're
Yeah.
looking at every little nuance of you. How you respond. Your cues, etc. Yes, 100%,
Yeah.
100%.
And if I think about that too much, it kind of freaks me out a little bit because it comes back to that thing about being authentic and being accessible. So if you spend your life conscious that okay, everything I say or do is being interpreted, criticized, it'll be paralyzing.
Yeah,
So my approach is okay, I just need to be completely how I am.
yeah, and breathe.
And yeah,
Yeah,
but you do need to stop and think. And it's even the the sort of micro moments. For example, we have a lunchroom at work where everybody goes in. So there's no formality or anything, and you go and you get your lunch and you sit on a table and have your lunch with whomever and whatever. And some of those conversations, you think, well, I want people just to chat like they're chatting about lunch. Don't change it because I've come and sat down. So, breeding that informality and getting to know each other and understanding what's going on in people's lives, that's
Yeah.
really important too. But then, realizing that, I can make or break someone's day by a look or a comment or something like that.
Yeah.
So, oh, okay, that's sobering.
Yeah, yeah, it is. It's extremely, and
Yeah.
it's great that you've got that awareness, Paris. It links to the metaphor that I've been using for a number of years within my practice, which is the fingerprint metaphor. The every interaction, every conversation, every look, every glance, we're leaving our fingerprint in those interactions. And you're a leader that I know has taken that to heart and is very conscious of that. And also
Hmm.
you espouse that in your leaders as well to encourage
Well,
them.
yeah, and look, it's also a great gift because you have the potential to unleash
Yes.
potential in others. So
Yeah.
by encouraging or coaching or just asking them, what would you do? Um, one thing I like to reflect is I've been doing this for 30 years. So what I learned 30 odd years ago, or 30 years ago is pretty irrelevant now in
Mm.
terms of the way certainly our industry works. So the blueprints for marketing or selling back then, it's changed completely. Technology's changed it, the world's changed.
Yeah.
So my knowledge from back then is outdated. So I could dine out on things that I did 25 years ago, but it has pretty much zero relevance to today. Therefore, I want to hire people who are really good at that stuff
Yeah.
and can tell me what to do.
Yeah.
That's what I want to do. So um, that's where I say my job is about talking to people, listening, trying to remove any barriers that might be getting in the way, or managing performance. That's part of it.
Yeah.
You have to realize that we're here to deliver results, and
Mm-hmm.
so we can't just sit in our hands and let things drift. You have to drive those results. But I firmly believe that me gripping harder and trying harder and getting stressed and shouting and screaming, and that's not going to move
No.
the dial
No.
at all.
Yeah.
Which maybe has helped me be a bit more at peace with everything. Don't get me wrong, there's still sleepless nights, there's still periods of high intensity and stress and that sort of thing. But if I look after myself and keep my exercise up, keep my nutrition up, work on my sleep health,
Yeah.
and find other outlets for creativity and that sort of thing, then that keeps the balance.
It's interesting that you say the calmness of you exude calmness, and and I know that personally when you were the crew chief of in my race across America, because here I was with John Evans, who is a psychologist and knows this stuff pretty well, and he's pretty chilled. And he
Mm.
met his match with you. He appreciated and recognized that you were also extremely calm aspect to the team and calming for the team as well. So in some very stressful moments, you came along and put your arm around me and were very calm, weren't particularly stressed at all, didn't stress me out. And that's sort of what I'm hearing in terms of how you approach your leadership situations. A comforting voice, someone to listen to, etc. What I'm interested in hearing as well from you, Paris, is who influenced your leadership career. So who's had a big significant influence on your leadership career? Was it your dad? Was it your parents? Was it someone else?
I think if I reflect in my career and people I've come across there, something that stuck with me was this is when I was at PepsiCo and I was in a factory, and the CEO of the Walker's Crisp business then. He was with us as well, and I observed him as we walked around a factory. And got to remember, it's noisy, hot, steam, that sort of thing. And he walked up to one of the operators who was working the line, and just started chatting with them and having a conversation and being able to have a really good interaction. And even though it was noisy, I couldn't actually hear what they were saying. You could tell from the body language.
Yeah.
Here's someone who's really connecting with, an operator. Very, very important job, but probably not someone who gets to interact with the boss very often. And I just thought, hey, that's really cool, because normally when I see this person, they're doing the presentations and they're doing the really slick stuff and the sophisticated marketing and selling and finance and that sort of thing. So that really stuck with me, that ability to connect with every level or every function, and to be able to manage those situations really, really effectively. And I remember distinctly saying to myself, I want to be that kind of person.
Right.
Now, how that's manifested itself for good and for bad is I've never been a sort of acolyte to hierarchy as a result.
Yeah.
Hierarchy is important. It's important in managing information and managing resources. But just because someone is however many levels above me doesn't mean I can't just have a conversation with them. And equally, I'd expect people to have that with myself. And that comes down to that accessibility part again. So that really stayed with me. And I think part of that is, in our organization, remember where the value's created as well. It's by people making stuff and doing a great job doing that. And having real respect and understanding for that, I think, is really important. On the other side of the ledger, there's leaders I've worked for who I definitely do not want to emulate or exhibit those behaviors. And as we've just talked about, probably the kind of people whose personality, demeanor might be polar opposite to mine. So the table thumpers or the shouters and screamers or the workaholics and that sort of thing, the people who create stress. Yeah, it's like that this is not healthy. That's not what I want to be or where I want to be. So I guess another thing, and I don't know, you might have some experience of this, Jim. I was an only child. My very early days, I was brought up by my grandmother. I'm probably, quite a quiet, insular person, if I'm allowed to be. I get my energy internally rather than externally.
Yeah.
So I guess a classic introvert. So there's something about self-reliance that happens. And one thing I know I do is I rehearse moments in my head. So if something is coming up, I know I rehearse the scenarios in my head. And as long as I can remember, I've always done that. So it's almost, in a high pressure situation, it feels like, okay, well, I've rehearsed this, I'm prepared, and I'm ready to go. It's not to say I don't get nervous, don't stutter or trip, but that sort of thing does go on in my head. Yeah.
And the rehearsal, does that come from your sporting background, from rowing, etc., or where do you feel?
I certainly remember in my rowing days visualizing, I think it was called then.
Visualization, for sure.
Yeah. And so visualizing the rowing technique for sure, visualizing races for sure. I did that. So maybe the discipline started there. I mean, I do remember reading something in a book about it, but it was more just something that I did.
It's interesting that it's interesting you pick it as well, because actually in the corporate world, lots of people don't necessarily use visualization or mental rehearsal particularly well, or often enough, I don't believe, because it is neuroscience is backing it up now that it does work. 100% it works.
Okay.
So yes, and going back to your point about, there are leaders that you've come across that were really terrible examples. I always think about, either be an exceptional leader and be a great example of what good looks like, or be a dreadful one, because people will learn from both of those examples. Because of course, if you're a dreadful leader, most people will say, there's no way I want to, repeat those sort of behaviors when I'm, get to that sort of position. So
Mm.
I always laugh about it and say, I'm not suggesting that you go and be a dreadful leader, but it's just, the point is that you do learn from them,
You
hopefully.
do.
Yeah. um
And I always remember, Jim, you saying to me 20 years ago or something, you always get what you need as the lesson, something like
yes.
that.
Yeah, no, I
Um,
remember we were trying to discover a pattern that you were running, so and that's what it's all about, isn't it? Trying to
yeah.
understand what are the blind spots that, because we don't know our blind spots. So back then you definitely had a blind spot, which was,
Mm,
running away from not not facing a bully at work or whatever it might have been, because
mm,
you go to the next job and the next organization, and the next person is an even bigger bullier,
mm,
even bigger bully, basically. And you
mm.
learned that you didn't have to have too many of those situations where you realized that, okay. And that was the other thing that was transformational for you, I think, from the outside looking at your career, is that you eventually, and you've spoken about it already today, you really started thinking about your personal values and the organization's values, and that when they match is almost like a match made in heaven. It's a dream. And you speak very highly and are very proud of the culture that you've developed there in Australia. So that's a beautiful place to be. You're the boss, the buck stops with you, and the culture is driven by you, which is, fantastic. And I've had the pleasure of meeting some of your senior leaders, and yeah, what a lovely group of people, energized, not mopey. So it really is great to see. What I'm also interested to hear from you is, what are some of your most memorable moments where you've coached? You spoke about coaching earlier, where you've coached someone and you've developed a team leader, you know, so maybe share, have you got some examples of that where you've had a direct influence by, having coached somebody from wherever they were to.
Yeah. I mean, I'll start with a hard lesson, and that is square pegs in round holes
Right,
don't
okay.
go.
Yep, okay.
So, yeah, I can remember early in my career inheriting an employee who had been a challenging employee, and they sort of get passed around sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
And then it's like, I can mold this person, I can turn them into a high performer. I'm sure I can work with them, etc., etc. And I couldn't. And, the lesson is round pegs in square holes don't go. So my
Yep.
lesson from that was actually it's better for everyone if you make a call that something's not going to work out rather than expending a huge amount of effort and energy, which probably ends up upsetting and stressing everyone
Yeah.
for no outcome. So I definitely took that forward. Having said that, I can think of, yeah, when I joined GSK as an example, yeah, you get the brief from your boss who says, yeah, here's the pen portraits of your team. Here's what I think. This one's great. This one needs development. This one's trouble. You might want to be getting rid of them.
Yeah.
And yeah, that's useful, but it's also, I like to think, okay, well, let me spend time and understand, and why is that performance not there, or that not more performance, more about engagement.
Mm-hmm.
Why is it not there? And I remember distinctly working with one person who she was miserable, but she was smart, and asking the question, right, what would this have to look like for you to be successful and unleash all this
Yeah.
smarts that you've got? And her response was, I just want to be heard and I want to have some responsibility and be empowered.
Wow.
So that here's a real leadership moment because I'm hearing this and she expressed that to me with real authenticity. So I think I can see that. Okay, I understand that. So I go back to my boss and I say, well, I think what you told me about this individual, I'm not quite sure I agree. I think there's a way of unlocking this. To which he's, well, on your head be it. So, so then it's like, okay, it's down to me. I'm in a leadership position. I have the opportunity. Okay, I'm going to empower that person. I'm going to support. I'm going to listen. And that was a transformational moment for her and for me to an extent because it's like,
Yeah.
wow, that really worked. And yeah, she went on to become one of my absolute, lieutenants,
Wow.
the
Yeah.
person you
Wow.
can absolutely rely on. And yeah, her career subsequently really took off and off she went. Now, I'm not saying that was because of me, but there was a moment there where there's a bit of a sliding doors. I could have listened to
Mm.
the wisdom I was receiving and say, okay, well, if I want to do the right thing politically and keep my boss happy and do what I'm told, I could do this, or
Yeah.
I can be accessible, I can listen, I can have an authentic conversation and think, okay, well, what will that reveal?
Yeah.
So that's an example of I think understanding, no one joins an organization or comes to work to do a bad job and be
No.
disengaged and be disruptive, right?
No. Absolutely not.
When
No.
we join, we've got 100% battery in
Yeah.
terms of energy, enthusiasm, commitment, everything.
Yep. Yep.
So if after time they don't have that, then you gotta say, okay, well, why? Now,
Yeah.
sometimes there's things outside the work environment you can't control necessarily, but if it's work, okay, what's happened?
Yeah, yeah. What have we
So
done to them? What have we done
yeah,
to cause this to happen? It's interesting. It's interesting that you started with the example of the question that you asked, which was what do we have to do? What do we have to figure out to unleash this? These great bits of your potential. And so what you were tapping into there is their motivation. So, and you very quickly got to that and then was able to, support that and grow that and develop that and nurture it. And you're basically showing care for your team member. And of course, they shone. And there's no surprise
mm,
that that would be the case. If I've got certain things that motivate me in my work that I do, and they are being met, then I'm a happy bunny. And, when you're happy, you're able to be more creative, more innovative, etc., and deal with problems, so it's no surprise that that's the case. Well, it's
well,
a,
and of course, organizations hire on technical skill and experience generally. So you
yeah.
get the CVs, you look and you say, yeah, well, have they done this job? Can they do it, et cetera, et cetera. So,
Mm, mm,
so that's a gift. So the technical stuff is a given,
yes.
but the unlock is the motivation, the discretionary effort, the creativity.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what gives you competitive advantage.
Yeah, it's their mindset,
Um,
isn't it? Ultimately, it's sort of
yeah.
they've got the skill set because they've got that on the CV and they've got that in their career. But actually, do they have the consistent mindset to be able to bring that energy to the
Mm,
workplace and interact with
yeah.
clients? Uh, I'm interested in this question, which I did pose to you previously, which is what would be your desert island? So on a desert island, the old classic desert island discs that we used to, I think it still runs nowadays. What book would you take on your desert island? So I'm curious to understand what book and then also why. So I know you're a great reader. So what book would you take? One book.
So that's a really tough question, and I don't know whether this is a controversial opinion, but I really find business books to be really dull.
Yeah, yeah.
And
Most of them are.
um, yeah, unless I'm just not reading the right ones, but yeah, typically written by men who say, I did this, I turned this around, this is what I did, and things. And I just think, oh, you know,
Hmm.
what's motivating this book? Is it genuine offer to help people, or is it ego, or
Yeah.
what is it? So I don't think I've of those classic business books. I'm not sure I've got through any of them. Um, and so I do read a lot. So recency theory probably impacts it. I know you asked for one, but I'm going to cheat a bit. So
Oh,
I did read a book about Stoicism recently,
okay.
and that was really interesting. There's some, I mean, of course, this was Marcus Aurelius and
Yeah.
etc. wrote this stuff 1,000, 15, 2,000 years ago or whatever it was. Um, but that kind of just submission to the world is going to be what the world is going to be. What are you going to do about yourself?
Yeah.
Sort of approach.
Yeah.
Um, there's some interesting parts in that whole philosophy, and it, yeah, it is very easy to get caught up in the dramas of everything,
Yeah.
everyday life, everyday pressures. And that book really struck me where is basically saying you just have to give in to all of that. All of
Hmm.
that is,
Yep.
what about you?
Yep.
So
So
so that was,
what was the
sorry,
title
go ahead,
again,
Jim.
Paris? What was the title of the book?
No, I can't remember the title.
Ah, okay.
Any book on Stoicism, I think
No, but
a
that
start.
obviously was a specific one. I remember reading Marcus Aurelius some years ago, probably 20 odd years ago, but um, it might be useful maybe when you have a look on your library for you to then ping me an email so that I can share that
Yeah.
with our listeners because that would be great. So,
Yeah, and it was a
but
very approachable book.
yeah,
It wasn't classical history or anything like that, so it was in a more modern context.
okay,
But I've literally just finished Rory Stewart's book, uh, Politics on the Edge. So Rory Stewart, former member of Parliament, now a great podcaster. Maybe you could link to his podcast, Jim, and that would help out. But
yeah,
um, there's some fascinating stuff in there about values, and his personal drive and how he held himself to such a high standard and yet found himself in this totally dysfunctional organization, which is called government and the Houses of Parliament, and how he reacted to that.
yeah, wow,
Um, so it's not a classical leadership book, but there's lots of really interesting um, stories in there. I guess what's terrifying is these were the people running the country,
yeah,
but equally ego, competitiveness, you know, moral values or lack of, they're all described in this. And so that's been a very revealing book, actually.
yeah. That sounds very interesting. So there are two books when I get the title of the other one that I will definitely get, and I'm sure our listeners will probably tap into as well. Um, what about where you draw your inspiration from? So, how what I always find it interesting because who motivates the motivators? So, how do you keep your motivation high and engagement for yourself? What do you do to continue to sharpen the saw for yourself?
You know, I think it comes internally rather than externally. Um, and so there are leaders I admire, people I work with who I really admire. One of the things that gives me tremendous energy is working with my leadership team. So
Right.
I mentioned that monthly routine. When we have that day together, even though we can be going through some pretty heavy stuff and sometimes, boring financials or whatever, the end of the day, it's like, right, well, we've really experienced that as a team. I get energy from that.
Yeah. Okay.
Um, but I, and it comes back to this stoicism part, actually, that there's something in there about just being. So I know if I go out and ride my bike, the process of riding my bike for an hour or so and just pedaling is That's calming and the mind slows down and that sort of thing. And there's those moments where you sort of go, okay, my brain energy's starting to refresh again. And it's simple things. Yeah, watching my daughter grow up, she's 14. Yeah, sometimes that's really inspiring because you can see the development happening almost in real time. So we were doing some maths homework last night, and all of a sudden it's like she's got it and she's doing the problems quicker than I am. Bearing in mind I've got the engineering degree and everything. I'm a bit rusty when it comes to quadratic equations, it turns out. But that's like, wow, so I'm inspired by that. Now, equally, she's a 14-year-old. There's some challenges as well. But, it's those kind of moments.
Yeah.
So it would be disingenuous of me to say, oh, yeah, there's one big kind of goal or one big motivational thing. I've been doing a bit of work recently with a food rescue charity here.
Yeah.
It's called Oz Harvest. They do amazing work around food security and food waste. And the leader of that organization, she's called Ronnie Khan. She was the founder 20 years ago. It's their 20th birthday. Her energy and her drive and her commitment is extraordinary.
Wow.
And yeah, she just sees no, you can't as okay, that's a challenge I have to overcome. Watch me do it. and beware those who attempt to step in her path. So I just have to stand and admire Ronnie and the way that she operates. And she has written a book, and it's a very good book. And the title of it is A Repurposed Life by Ronnie Khan.
A repurpose.
That's a very good read. So I would recommend that. And yeah, the people who listen to this podcast, if you can take a look at what Oz Harvest does and support them in any way, that would be tremendous.
Perfect. I like that. A Repurposed Life. What a beautiful title. Okay. At what point in your career did you, and maybe you've covered this already, but I'll ask it anyway. At what point in your career do you feel you figured leadership out? I mean, I know it's ongoing, but was there a moment where you thought, yeah, I've got this suss now. These are the things I need to focus on. These are the important things. The big rocks, as Stephen Covey might say.
The big rocks. I mean, I wouldn't be as bold as to say I've got this sorted out. There's always something around the corner.
Yeah. We're always
pandemics, things like that.
Yeah, curveballs are always going to come.
Yeah. Probably what I have learned is what helps me become most effective. So, learning that what you're pretty good at, and also learning what you're not so good at, and being prepared to ask for help.
Yeah. Okay.
Those, I think once you've worked that out, that helps. When I took on this job, the business situation was a bit different, but the pressure's higher because it's like, okay, here's the new person. What are they going to do? And I'd said I wanted strategy, culture, capability. And that's why I joined this organization and what I wanted to lean into. So then it is all on you. So those first couple of years, the absolute pressure is higher. But you put some things in place, you start to get some results, you start to build confidence, and then things feel, I wouldn't say easier, but different. I guess I got to a point where I became a lot better at compartmentalizing. And that probably is a key skill, I think, because there's always something going wrong. There's always something breaking. There's always something not turning out how you want it to be, or a challenge, or a competitor, or a customer, or something like that. And in my job, I have to be able to move from topic to topic, subject to subject. So if you ruminate on the thing that hits your desk at 9 o'clock in the morning all day, It's not going to help all those other items.
Mm.
So probably I would say probably after COVID. So what are we talking? 2022. I've got a lot better at, okay, that's a controllable. Have I got the right resources on that? That's boxed off. We've got the right people looking at that.
Right.
Okay, don't worry about that. Next one.
Yep.
And the ability to do that, I think, is really critical. Now, I know that when I'm stressed is when I ruminate and rehearse all of those things all of the time. So I know when the stress levels are high,
Mm.
and so that's when I have to go back to first principles, I guess, and say, okay, if these are all of the key issues, have I got the right priorities and have I got the right resources looking at them? And are we asking the right questions? And are we empowering the people to do what they need to do? I think getting to that spot is a little bit closer to the sort of nirvana than,
Right.
um, yeah. And yeah, and maybe it's because once you've been hit by a few waves of challenges, you sort of build up a bit of resilience to it.
Yeah.
But yeah, being able to say, okay, let's just box these things off is, I think I've got much better at that.
It's interesting because you're talking about staying in the lane and fencing it off and then moving on to the next thing. But actually, what's overriding that I'm sensing in this, that I'm picking up in this conversation, is that you also, and I'm not sure you're fully aware of, the journey that you've taken your organization on since you've been there. So you've changed their culture, but that was, so you were sort of almost living and dying by the sword. You decided that you wanted to create a culture of, people being heard, being coached, tapping into their full potential, motivating, engaging, etc. So, so you were basically saying, this is how I'd like to run the organization. Now, some that could be potentially, so you're almost, it's almost like an experiment. You're almost doing an
Hmm.
experiment on the organization to sort of say, I believe this so passionately in this is what I want to do and this is what I want to achieve. So that must have been a little bit scary somewhere in there, where you were saying, I think the most important thing is to develop the right culture, and then everything else will come as a result of that right culture.
Yeah, I mean, I wonder whether, I can't say it was a conscious, that is the thing that needs the attention, but I did definitely think about strategy, capability, culture.
Yeah.
And probably my assessment when I joined the organization was the strategies weren't bad strategies, and strategy is really technical anyway. We're all
Mm,
trained to do strategy.
mm,
Capability, some pockets really good, some things not so great, but not bad,
mm-hmm.
um, but not enabled or not empowered. And it was the culture part that
Help that.
really had to unlock.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, and that's the simple things like make decisions. Don't
Right.
let things drift. Have a bit of energy.
Was
And
that you making
but
decisions, Paris? Was that you
yeah,
making? Yeah.
yeah.
Okay. Uh-huh. Mm-hmm.
But I was very conscious that I think I even said that that it was effectively a turnaround. And I said, well, in 12 months, I'll either be a hero or I'll be out of a job.
Right.
And things worked out, and that's been fantastic. And I think, as I said earlier, I've been fortunate. McCormick is a fantastic organization that really does live its values and
Mm.
and live its people principles. So I've been fortunate that I've found that right organization. Um, and part of that is luck. I mean, you apply for a job and yeah, you do due diligence, but you really don't know what you're going to get until you're in it.
Yeah.
So um, so that has been fortunate. But then again, I've done some things and taken some risks, I guess you could call them, in order to drive that performance. And the other thing is, it's not just me. I mean, okay, I'm the boss, but I've got a leadership team um, who have been on this journey with me, and without them, nothing would happen.
Sure.
And
Yeah, it's interesting that you say that. I mean, a lot of leaders would probably be in the same space. They'd say it's not all on me. Well, actually, the truth is it is, because you're the leader and you chose those people and you motivate those people to stay, etc. So it is actually on you, and the culture that you've developed is on you because you're the one that's, it does whittle down from the top down. That's just how it is. And I see it in organizations where the culture's not great. And they're not getting the results that they need. It all links to. It's funny, and I'm not attempting to steer this because this is an emotional intelligence podcast, but there is, it is the key ingredient that makes the difference. If you were looking for an elixir to drink, it would be that. So what are you going to put in the drink? Well, I'm going to put this stuff in because I know it's going to inspire and engage the team to such a level and help them interact with other people that they, whether it's clients or their own team members as well.
mm. and we have very consciously worked at it though.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, we've spent the time as an exec team working on ourselves, working on how we interact with each other, working with a coach over those years,
Yeah.
and further and further levels of understanding and sophistication, um and that's been really valuable. And in fact, that's been essential because once you're sat in the circle and you're actually with each other, and you're having to be truthful and everything else, well, then that's a tremendous opportunity.
Yeah, it
But you've
is.
got to put the time in to do that, and you've got to be prepared to hear some stuff you like and some stuff that you'll be like, oh, I don't want to hear that, but I need to hear that.
Yep.
So we do that work.
Yeah, good. And again, that's something that a lot of organizations don't do. So they're so focused on the numbers that that's all they're doing. They're focusing and chasing the numbers, and they're not doing any real leadership development work, which is an investment. It's an investment in you as individuals, but in the culture. So, yeah. Is there anything else that you think would be useful to add to this conversation, Paris, before we sort of draw a line under this interview?
I think something that's on my mind, and it's sort of connected, is um, understanding what the young folks coming through, what does leadership look like to them?
Mm-hmm.
Because the Gen Zs and the Gen Alphas, their outlook on life is somewhat different.
Yep.
The aspirations are somewhat different, and so um, I'm really curious as to what can some of us older folks learn from them, because they're going to be shaping all of this in the next 20 years.
Of course.
Um, so it's just a question I pose at the moment, and I've been posing it internally, because it's very easy to be generalize and roll your eyes at folks who blah, 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 that intergenerational stuff. But the reality is, these folks are going to be running organizations and governments and the world.
Yeah.
So what can we learn from them? And I think it's unwise to assume that their expectations or patterns will be any way similar to ours. And so I'm intrigued by that. So I just sort of pose that to you and to the people who listen to this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That what can we learn from?
Well, they're a very different breed, aren't they? They're a breed of individuals that that don't want to be working, ridiculous hours, where you would have put in the hard yards through your career as a leader, as you were going up the ranks, and putting in some significant chunks of time, taking you away from your family, taking you away from taking care of yourself, i.e. being able to exercise, having the time to do any of that sort of stuff. Whereas they want more balance, They certainly
Mm.
want a life work balance. And I think if I
Mm.
think about the Australians, the sort of the surfing culture and all the rest of it, why wouldn't they want to be out playing and having fun, but also enjoying themselves while they're at work? So I think there's probably going to be more demand on making it an exciting, inspiring, creative environment. So environment probably in the workplace, which is not really that important. Of course, it is important, but it's sort of like a comfy chair and all that and the soft furnishing and all the rest of it. That is important to some people, but the environment and making it fun and funky is a quest. I think Google are probably a good example of that, where they make it a more of a fun environment and engaging, and they've got scooters they sneak around in the office on, but it's we laugh, but that, could you imagine that in some of the corporate environments that you were previously in?
Well, it's not that long ago that I was wearing a suit and tie, and yeah, now I can't remember the last time I put a suit on
Exactly.
to
So
work, at least.
yeah, so I
But
could I can see some of
sorry,
that
Jim.
coming into play. Yeah, so you were going to say, go on.
Well, no, I laugh at the scooters and the football tables and the ping pong tables because they're actually here to do some work,
Of
and
course. Yeah,
so
of course.
and those things wear out pretty quickly. But you mentioned how fun and play. Yeah, how do you get the same satisfaction out of work?
Yeah.
So creativity, um, thinking up new business models, thinking up new ways of doing things, innovation. Those things are all important, as well as the financial rewards and sense of community you get from work. The other side, I work in a manufacturing business. The majority of our employees make things and move things in warehouses and that sort of stuff. So the table tennis table is not much use to them when
No.
they're working on production lines. So the employee of the future, what's that going to look like? And
Yeah.
so it's something that's on my mind at the moment.
Yeah, no, I think it's a great thing to be thinking about, because you'll be handing it off to that generation.
Mm.
So and it's a worthy thing to be thinking about. I'm not sure I've got any answers personally right now, but it's one to cogitate on for sure. It's great that you're thinking about it and you got your eye on it, because AI is also something that people are. I think there's a little bit of fear around all of this. The people are concerned that it's going to be job losses and all the rest of it. You're still going to need human beings to input the data into the AI stuff, to then generate something. So that's going to be an interesting one. There's a lot of talk on AI in the coaching world and in the corporate world, and we'll figure it out. There's a
Yeah, I mean,
there's a,
I actually, I'm a bit more positive on it. I think it will take away a lot of the admin and
yeah,
the boring stuff to create time for the exciting stuff and the value added and the innovative
yeah, completely,
effort.
completely, completely.
Yeah.
Well, buddy, it's been a pleasure catching up with you. I know that my listeners will get a lot from this conversation, and they'll be interested to hear some of the ingredients that you've had in your leadership recipe cookbook. So it's been a real pleasure to catch up, and I'm very grateful for you being able to put some time aside for this particular interview. So I wish you and the family well, of course. And look forward to catching up with you at some point very soon, and good luck with the triathlon that you'll be taking place in a couple of weeks time. So you got your little
You've revealed it to your
yeah,
podcast now,
I
so
have.
now there's no
Yeah,
backing out. Yeah.
no, that's it. There's a triathlon that Paris is competing in a couple of weeks time, corporate triathlon. So good luck in that. Keep a beady eye out for the sharks, because that's one of my big fears is sharks.
Yeah.
Probably a very unnatural fear, but it is something that's genuine for me. When I go swimming in the sea, I do have the heebie-jeebies.
You'd be very unlucky to come across a shark in Port Phillip Bay, but
Oof.
who knows?
Yeah, you never know. But look, thanks ever so much for spending some time with me today, Paris. It's been a real pleasure.
Thanks, Jim. It's been wonderful to catch up. Thank you.
Well, that's a wrap for this week's episode. Thank you for listening. Remember to share and subscribe to the EI Guru podcast, and if you have any questions, you can post them once you've subscribed. You can follow me on Instagram at the EI Guru, and you can get more information from my website, theeiguru.com. Have a fantastic week. Bye for now.